Are you ready to have some fun just before the workshop begins? Because I have a really fun project we're going to do over the next 4 days. It's called our Countdown Coloring Book Project. Now you may wonder what this is going to be. Well, just over on my desk here I have an example. So this would be the opening of the book. We have it all bound this way. As you can see, there's a bit of a binding. Now, I've Velcroed this one, but what this is a coloring book that is perfed, so I can actually pull the pages out and color. And we're going to design this and work on it over the next 4 days. So I've broken it down into parts because just doing this alone all by itself takes a couple of hours. And I don't want to have a video that's a couple of hours long, so we're going to do it as our countdown project. Now, one of the biggest things is the supplies that you're going to be using. Now, I'm going to explain these a little bit. Now, 16 sheets of plain copy paper. Well, you can use 8.5 by 11. The big thing is, let me just grab one here. This is on an 8.5 by 11, so you can use copy paper. I used a thicker copy paper at 32 pounds, but I needed 10 sheets just for the coloring pages. And what I did is I cut 6 blanks as well, and that gave me the ability to add different things inside. And then you're going to need some light cardstock. Once again, you can use 8.5 by 11 because we try to measure this project so that it fits 8.5 by 11. So you can use different things, like you're going to have a couple of sheets that are going to be the cover. So perhaps you want to have the cover in one design, and I showed you on the inside you have an inside design also. So those are the two different ones, and you want to have 2 sheets of each. 8.5 by 11 works just fine, and you can use that light cardstock. Heavy cardstock doesn't work as a cover. And of course, other parts of this project, you're going to need some glue. For the glue I am using today, I am going to be using this. It's called glitter glue, and this one dries clear. There's no glitter in it, but it's glitter art glue, and it works extremely well for what we want. Now, inside the cover, because we cut it in a couple of pieces so we have a nice hinge for it to open, I want you to think about whether you want to use a nice hinge tape. Now you can get this hinge tape, and you have to dampen it in order to stick it down. So that is one option. The other option is just get a nice masking tape, something that's going to stick permanently. You can actually glue it into place if you need to, because you need that hinge to open and you don't want it to break. So that is an idea that you can use for that. Of course, pair of scissors, because when you're cutting with your Cricut, sometimes you just need to give it a little trim. Standard grip mat, and you'll need a scoring wheel or stylus. We do a lot of scoring. Now, we also are going to use the perf tool, because part of this coloring book is you're going to be able to pull the pages out with a perf. Now, if you don't have a Maker 3 and you want to do a perf, I will show you how to do that when we get over to our design space portion of it. I'll show you how to make it with the perf tool, and then I'll show you how to make it without a perf tool, but it'll give you something very similar, just a little firmer to pull off. Of course, you're going to need a fine tip blade and a hole punch if you decide to punch the holes by hand. Otherwise, I put those holes in Design Space, and we will do that in Design Space, and that will be tomorrow, of course. And finally, some ribbon for tying the project together. Let me just grab the project here. I used a string for this one, and I also found some ribbon that I took off something I got at Christmas, and I'm going to be using that ribbon in place. So don't go out and buy new things. Now, I mentioned cardboard at the top. I know I skipped over it. Flat preferred. Now, any kind of cardboard will work. You're just going to work a little harder at it. I just want to show you what I used for the cardboard, and I kept a cereal box. So I cut out a piece of the cereal box, and then on the back, of course, it's done its cut, and I'm going to show you how to use this appropriately. I like using cereal boxes for my books because they're easy. We have them in the house all the time, and I'm able to cut them. Now we're going to do a repeat cut with it. However, we'll worry about that when we get to the cutting portion of everything. So what's going to happen over the next 4 days? So here is our project agenda. Today we're doing all the planning and all the measuring, and I'm going to show you exactly what to do when you have a project from scratch. We are doing this from scratch, and you're going to have a lot of design ideas come into your head as we go through. You don't have to hold to my dimensions. You can create them bigger or smaller depending on what you want to use. On day 2, I call it prepping the design. This is where we're going to go into design space, take all of our measurements, and then we're going to go into design space and put everything in order. I'm going to show you a few tricks with design space in order to take your design from your imagination and coming in and actually doing the design in design space. Now, that's just a couple of it. Now, when you go to cut this project, this will be on day 3. There's a few tips and tricks on cutting and, of course, folding, and we will do that on day 3. And the reason I left it for the next day is because it's going to take a lot of time to do your cutting, especially if you're doing print then cut with your machine, as it's one page at a time. It takes a while to load it in, scan it. It's going to want, of course, to have your scoring wheel or stylus, and then it's going to want a perf tool if you're using that, and then a fine tip blade. So you have a lot of tool changes as we go through. So we left that to a day on its own. And of course, day 4 is the assembly of the whole thing, getting the glue in place, making sure things are going to work. And then we're going to do a show and tell. So let's get into this project. Today is our planning day. So let's take a look here. This is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to determine the size of our book. We're going to be placing elements. Now we're going to do this with scrap paper initially so we get the right measurements. We're going to measure our pages and the cover exactly what we want. And then we're going to decide on coloring the images, what images you want to use for coloring. I'm going to provide you with 10 of them, but you don't have to use mine. You can come up with some of your own, and I'll show you a couple of places that you can get those. And of course, deciding on the colors for your cover. I've already decided mine, but you are going to have to make that decision as well. So in order to get going, we're going to go over to my demo table to start measuring and working on all these parts and pieces. So as I mentioned before, I had the cardboard. I'm just going to move a few things out of the way here so that we can start working with doing a lot of measuring. Now I'm just going to put my scrap paper to the side for a moment. And I'm just going to grab some other scrap papers that I had. And this is 11 by, 8.5 by 14. I just happen to have a few scrap pieces around. Now, when I created the example book, and this is really important, I created the example book. I made it a little wider in a Velcro, but I didn't like it per se. I just knew that I wanted to have my coloring pages in here, but we have to measure now and make sure that we are going to be able to do what we need to do. Now, when we take a look at these various different pages, and I'll just grab one that I've already cut out, we have to remember that our coloring page is going to go on one part of it. We have a perf line here, but we also have a fold line, and the reason we have the fold line, it just makes the paper thicker, and that is exactly what we want to do here. We want to have a fold over so that the work is easier to manipulate. You can pull it out, it doesn't affect the book, and you have a good binding. So we have to make sure that when we're going to design all of this, that we have the right size. Now we're going to start with the inside pages and decide what size we want these to be. Let me just move this out of the way for a moment. I'm going to have a very messy desk. So I've just got a ruler here, and what I want to do is, I know this one's the perfect size, but I just want to show you that if the design itself you're going to use, this one would be 5 1/8. Now, what you want to do is be able to take a scrap of paper and write down, we want the image 5 1/8 inch. Now, we will need a fold over here, so we're going to have to decide, you know, how big this is going to be. Now, I'm just going to bring this along here, and it shows me I have 3 1/2 inches for my fold. Oh, right here, 3 1/4 inches for my fold. So plus 3 1/4 fold. Now I'm going to double check my measurement here for my image, and the reason I'm going to check it is my ruler doesn't start it at right at the beginning of 1. So it's actually 5 1/4. And that's why I always want to double check everything. So we have 5 1/4 for the image, and then we have 3 1/4 over here for the outside edges. So basically we have 8 1/2 inches total. Now you could make it smaller. Now that's just the inside pages. So we know we are going to be working with that. Now you don't have to have your image that big, but I find that it's easy to color. You could make it bigger, it doesn't matter. As long as you have a piece of paper that it will cut on quite easily. Now, you could go up to 11 inches if you had 11-inch paper. It's, you know, 11 inches will work. So if you want 8.5 by 11, this is actually the better size for it. Now, the other measurement we need here, of course, is across. So I'm just going to take my measurement across, and that is 5 1/2 inches deep. So this is width, and this is height, and we want 5 1/2 inches. Now that's actually perfect. That's exactly what we're going to need. Now you're going to do the same thing when it comes to the size that you want. You don't have to follow exactly what I am, but this is exactly the way we do this. Now, you'll notice that there are some holes in here. Well, I'm not going to measure in the holes. I have a couple of tricks that I'm going to show you how to get the holes, and they will match everything when you go to cut the entire project out. So that looks pretty good, but one thing I will let you know is from the top of the hole to the top of the page is 1 inch, and the same thing here. So we know they're 1 inch top to bottom, so let's just make a little note here. Holes 1 inch from top and bottom. And we are going to try and center these in. We try to make these approximately 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch, whatever, wherever you put the hole here from the edge. So if you decide you want it right in the middle at 3/4, you're going to have to go from your fold line and go 3/4 as well. So I will show you how to match that later, but at least we know the dimensions. Okay, so that's our inside page. The next issue, of course, is we want a cover for it, and the cover has to be a small amount larger. Take a look at this one. You can see a little bit at the bottom and a little bit at the top. So we know it has to be a little bit larger top and bottom. And of course, if I took my ruler to this, I will see that it is approximately an extra 1/4 of an inch. So let's now take some measurements for the cover. So we want it, of course, I said 1/4 inch top and 1/4 inch bottom. That's going to add 1/2 inch to the height. We already have 5 1/2. So we're going to have cover is going to be 6 inches high. Now, here's the complication. What about the width? How wide do we want to make it? Well, here is where we have to do some measuring again. We need to fold this over because we know it's going to be folded. And I'm just giving a ballpark because this is something I've already got in place. So if I measure this folded, it is 7 inches, but I'm going to need a 1/4 of an inch on the right side, and I want 1/4 of an inch on the other side. So 7 1/4 1/4 is 7.5 inches wide. Now that's going to be the cover. Now, interestingly, because it already pre-printed one, it looked pretty easy to get that measurement. What you generally would do is you would sketch something out, what you want. So I said we wanted to have 8.5 total. So there's our 8.5. And of course, coming down, I said that we wanted to have height 5.5. 5.5's right there. And I can just square this off. This is generally how I will design everything as well. I've got the one line. Let me just pull this up so you can see it. So I drew my line down at the 5.5, and then I will come across here. Now this is going to be the total width. Now for my image, as we mentioned, it's 5 1/4. So I'm just going to lay the ruler down 5 1/4, and I have to make a mark. I wish I had a ruler that had it, the numbers went right to the edge, but we don't. So this is 5 1/4. See what I'm doing here? Yes. So this is image. Now I've got to divide that. It looks a bit crooked, but we'll fix that up in a minute. This is just a ballpark figure anyway, and we should have, let's see, 3 1/8, and let's just take this, let's go 1.5. I'm going to make a little change here. Let's go 1.5 and 1.5. Let's do the same down here. 1.5 and 1.5. When you're measuring and doing things, looks a little better. Okay, that's our first 1.5. Our other 1.5. I'll look straighter. Just grab my eraser. Let's get rid of this other line. All right, so we know this is the fold over. This is fold inside. And if I'm going to perf, this is going to be my perf line. So I'll just make note here, perf line. This will be a score line. And of course, that's the image. Now hopefully we still have the right amount of space across here. So let me just go 8.5. Yes, perfect. So now what we have is the perfect map that we're going to do. Now I'm going to put the inches inside here. So this is 5. I better check it now that we've made some changes. 1, 2, 3. It is 5.5 inches now, because we're taking from here, so we want this now 5 1/2, and each of these should be 1.5. And this is just going to make it easy when we go, of course, into design space when we want to start working on things. All right, now the next one, of course, I am going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut it out. This is all rough design work at this point. We are doing most things by scratch. All right, let me get rid of my excess paper here. All right, let's grab another sheet. And we mentioned that we wanted this 7.5 wide. So let's grab this, go to the edge, 7.5. And what we're doing here is we're cutting different things out just to make sure our design is going to work long before we cut out our material, long before. So let me just pull this up a bit. Lines. 7.5, and we decided on our little orange piece here we wanted it 6 inches high, so we're going to measure down 6 inches. Inches. All right, we are going to, of course, cut it out. Now let's just test this a little bit. I'm just going to hit this as a fold line. I just want to make sure things are going to fit. So this is to be our cover. This is one we wrote on, and this should be, so I have 1/4 inch all the way around, and as you can see I do have a border all the way around, so we know that that's going to be a fit because this is our fold. So that looks like it's going to fit really nicely. Now, one last thing, I just want to make sure we mark this. So this is 7.5 inches, and this is our cover. This will be out of cardstock, and we wanted it 6 inches high. Now we're going to use these pieces of paper when we go to Design Space to do our cover. Now, one last thing. I'm not going to draw another cover, but we need part of the cover, of course, excuse me, with this one, that we hinge. You see there's a hinge here. You can see it fold over. Now there is a 1/4 inch gap right here, and we want to have that gap enough so that this is the same 1.5 inches. Now I have an example, so 1.5 inches, I make it about 1.25 inches over. We're going to put our hinge. So 1.25, 1.25, and you're going to see what I'm going to do here in a second. 1.25. And we want a 1/4 inch gap. So I'm actually going to add another little 1/4 inch one here. I'll have to come back up here and do this one again. You can see that. It's getting crowded for space here. Okay, so let's do this measurement once again. So we're coming over 1.25 and 1.5. I'm making 2 lines to mark. I'll do the same thing towards the bottom here. Just make sure that it's as straight as possible. So 1.25 and 1.5. So I'm going to put this 1.25 inches from here to here. Here to here. Oh, get my pencil to work. I always work with pencils. Okay, that's to here. And in here is 1/4 inch. And when we go to do our cut, I will explain it more to you when we get inside of Design Space tomorrow. Take that down. So we're going to have one cover that is absolutely full. It's the full meal deal. You'll have one cover that's this size, and the next part of the cover will have this cut out and this part cut out. And that's so everything will fit together. So let's just one more time make sure that everything is going to match here. This is our perf line. So the perf line will show past this, and that's the whole idea. Can you see what I'm working on here? There's the perf line under here. Right here is our perf line that we're going to set up. So if I bring this up here, you'll see the perf line falls within the hinge, and that's exactly what you want. And the reason you want it inside there and not back here or not here, it's going to leave too much extra paper when we go through in order to do that. So now we have all our measurements. We have the measurements for the image. We have the measurements for the cover. Now, just a couple of more things we need to measure, and of course that is for the paper that's going over top of the cover and the paper that's going inside the cover. So we need to measure those as well. I'm just going to close this for a second. So on the outside, of course, I'm going to take another piece of paper here. Get the cover, we have the image. Now when I'm doing the cover, I want it to fold over at least 1/4 inch. So we want it to fold over at least 1/4 inch all the way around. So if we add another 1/2 inch to this, we know we're going to have it 8, but you can make it a little bit bigger if you want. It doesn't really matter. And 6 inches plus 1/2 is 6.5, but you can make it a little better and bigger. All right, so we decided we would go a little extra here. We want 7.5, we want 8. You can make it a little bigger if you want. I will just stick with 8 right now, and I will just mark this. 8. Now coming the other way, we decided we wanted 6.5. So let me just turn this over. We're going to come here to 6.5, which is here. Bring it down. 6.5. Let me just move some things out of the way here so that we have room to work. Okay, just move my scissors. All right, first time here we want to take a line down here, and the next one, is that straight? It doesn't look straight to me, but I guess it is. 8, 6.5, 6.5. All right, so now we have coming up and down this way, we have 6.5 inches. And we have 8 inches going this way, and this is the outside, I'm going to call it a skin or a cover, skin of the cover. All right, let us get some scissors here. Let's cut this right out. Now this is where we're going to start having a little fun with it, because this is the skin. Now I could ahead of time cut the corners off because we're going to do that, but I prefer to do it when I am actually making the design inside of Design Space or just doing it manually. Okay, so we now have the outside of the cover. Here's our cover. Great. No, it's 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. Now, the other thing we need to do is make an inside piece, and that is going to be 1/2 inch smaller. But if I make it 1/2 inch smaller, inside, I'm going to have it just match. So I'm going to get as close to this size as possible, close to the cover size as possible. So let's just grab one more sheet. I know it's a lot of measuring, and I'll go over it again. So we know this one is going to be approximately this. And I'll just draw the line across here like this so I have an idea of what the cover is. What we want to be able to do, of course, is just make it slightly smaller. Now, I mean by slight, I mean slight. It just has to fit over top. So now my ruler, I'll be able to take it right to the edge here. That gives me a great idea if I could cut it off this end. So what I'm going to do is going to turn this over, because it has approximately 1/8 of an inch right here. I'm going to be able to then just make a mark just inside. I'm only going to make the mark on this side, and then I'll do the same thing on this side. It's approximately 1/8 of an inch, and I will do the same coming off the other side as well. One here. One here. I know this is pretty much a crash lesson in doing some design, but this is a process I go through with everything I make. I do it all ahead of time with paper. All right, let's get some lines drawn in here. It's pretty straight. Okay, let's do this one while I'm on this side. It's pretty straight. Remember, you're just trying to make it slightly smaller, so don't worry about it if it doesn't match exactly. Just want it slightly smaller. And of course, you can decide to even make it smaller, but you would have to make your other cover edges work better. And then I will take the last piece off here, and then we'll measure it and write down our measurements. That's the important part next. Okay, so let's measure our width. Goes from here. Now it's exactly 7 1/4 inches. So 7 1/4 inches. And let's measure it the other way. And this is 5 3/4 inches. So 5 3/4 inches. And of course, I am going to take my scissors and cut this out. And then we're going to take a look and see what all the pieces are that we have measured. Make sure we've got all our parts together. Just cut that off, because this is a good way to test to see if things are going to fit as well. All right, let's take a look at what we have. This is the inside cover. And this is the outside cover. So we're just going to put this one inside here. And yes, it fits inside. When you fold this other one over, we're going to be able to put that one in place. So that's the outside skin, and this is the inside skin. And of course, we have the cover itself, and that fits just slightly bigger than this. So let me just put this one on top. Yep, slightly smaller, exactly what I want. So we've got 1, 2, 3 pieces here now. And then finally, we've done some measurements, of course, for how big we want the image. I want 1.5 inches on each of these. So we're pretty well ready to go with all the pieces we have. Now, I have marked it down on here somewhat, but I didn't write it all down. You can use a scrap paper and just write the parts down. I like to use ones that I cut out by hand because now I have my own little prototype. So I have the image that's going to have a fold. I have the inside of my cover. I have the cover, and I have the outside skin. So those are the pieces that we needed to measure in order to take the next step with this project. So take some time, measure things out, make sure you have exactly what you want. And tomorrow on day 2, what we are going to do is, of course, take all of our measurements and put them into Design Space, and then we're going to add some little circles for holes unless you want to do hole punching on your own. So that is it for today, and of course tomorrow we're in Design Space. I will see you over there tomorrow.